You know, when I was going through the source material for this week, there's one image that just kept sticking in my mind. I'm sure you know the one. October 1st, 1949.
Oh, yeah. Mao Zedong, standing on the balcony of the Tiananmen Gate, the gate of heavenly peace.
Exactly. It's probably one of the most definitive photographs of the entire 20th century, certainly in Asia. He's up there in front of this massive crowd declaring the founding of the People's Republic of China.
Hmm.
And whenever you see that photo in a textbook or a documentary, it's always presented as like the finish line, the victory lap. The long war is over, the nationalists have fled, and a new era is beginning.
It's the end of the story, the neat and tidy conclusion to a long, bloody struggle.
But it's not, is it? When you actually dig into the internal CCP documents from that time,
Yeah.
which we have a huge stack of for this deep dive, the feeling isn't celebration. It's much closer to panic.
Oh, absolutely. They've just inherited this enormous, completely broken country. I mean, think about it. Hyperinflation was so bad that the currency was worthless. There were still pockets of resistance, warlords in the South and West.
And the economy was basically pre-industrial for most of the country?
And you have to remember, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, had literally zero experience running a country. They were guerrilla fighters. They'd spent decades in the mountains. They knew how to ambush a convoy or mobilize a village.
Right.
They did not know how to set interest rates or manage a national grain supply.
It's that classic dog catching the car problem, isn't it? For 30 years you chase it and then one day you catch it. And now you have to figure out how to drive the thing without immediately crashing it into a ditch.
And that's really the core tension we're going to explore today. We are doing a deep dive into the rise and rule of Mao Zedong, but we're going to structure it in a way that really lets us get at the mechanics of how power is won and then how it's kept.
Yeah, so we're splitting this into two big acts, following the chronology of the sources. Part one is what we're calling emergence. It's the story of how a tiny Marxist study group of, 57 people?
57, yep.
How they managed to take over a nation of hundreds of millions. It's an incredible story.
And then part two will be consolidation and maintenance. Because once they had the power, the question became, how do you hold on to it? And as we'll see, Mao's methods for maintaining power were, well, they were often based on creating even more chaos.
It's a massive story to unpack. We've got decades to cover, from the last emperor all the way to the death of the chairman. So let's jump right into part one, emergence. And to really understand why communism even had a chance in China, you have to understand the state of the country before the CCP even existed.
You have to start with what the Chinese themselves call the century of humiliation.
And that's not just like a dramatic name, it was the lived reality.
It really was. From the mid-1800s onwards, China, which it had always seen itself as the Middle Kingdom, the literal center of the civilized world, was being systematically humbled by foreign powers.
You had the British with the Opium Wars, the French, the Germans, the Russians, and eventually the Japanese, all carving out what they called spheres of influence.
Which is really a polite term for a colonial foothold. They controlled the trade, the ports, the customs revenue. They had their own laws on Chinese soil.
It's like being a guest in your own house, but the guests are selling your furniture and telling you what time you have to be in bed.
A perfect analogy. And the ruling dynasty, the king, was just completely powerless to stop it. They were corrupt, they were technologically backward, and their attempts at reform were too little too late.
So in 1911, the whole thing just crumbles, the dynasty collapses, a republic is declared. But, and this is so critical for you to grasp, there was no government ready to step in. The emperor was gone, but what replaced him was basically nothing.
A power vacuum. And into that vacuum rushed the warlords.
The warlord era, roughly 1916 to 1927. This is the world the CCP is born into.
And it's hard for us to imagine what this was like. The country didn't just have a weak central government. It had no central government. It fractured into dozens of personal fiefdoms, each run by a general with his own private army.
And the level of misery for the average person, who is usually a peasant farmer, was just off the charts.
I mean, some of the stories in the sources are horrifying. Warlords would march into a province and demand taxes. But not just for that year. I was reading one account of a general in Sichuan who collected taxes up to the 1980s.
He was collecting taxes 50 years in advance.
50 years. And if a rival army came through next month, they'd demand their own taxes. And between tax collections, the soldiers would just loot whatever was left. They'd steal the crops, conscript the young men. It was total predatory anarchy.
So if you're a peasant, and that's 80% of the population, your primary political desire isn't democracy or individual liberty.
Well,
It's order. It's just, please, can someone make this stop?
stability, predictability. anything other than this chaos. And it's into that desperation that two major forces emerge. The nationalists, or the Kuomintang, and this tiny new group founded in Shanghai in 1921.
The Chinese Communist Party.
And when we say tiny, we mean it. The founding Congress in 1921 had 12 delegates,
12.
and they represented a grand total of 57 members across the entire country.
I've had family dinners bigger than that. It's statistically insignificant.
Completely. And Mao Zedong was there, but he wasn't even the leader. He was just the delegate from Hunan province, a former assistant librarian from Peking University. They were nobodies.
But they had a powerful backer.
They did. They had the Comintern, the Communist International, run out of Moscow. The Soviet Union saw itself as the leader of a global revolution, and they were essentially acting like venture capitalists for communists.
So they're providing the seed money, the training, the ideology.
But the Soviets looked at this tiny group of 57 Chinese intellectuals and, quite rightly, said, you guys are not going to take over China on your own. It's a fantasy.
You need to latch onto something bigger.
Precisely. You need to piggyback on the real revolutionary force in China right now, which was the nationalists, the GMD. So in 1924, Moscow forces the CCP into an alliance with the nationalists.
The First United Front.
The First United Front.
Yeah.
Their shared goal was to defeat the warlords and unify the country. But it was always a marriage of convenience.
A total shotgun wedding. The nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek after Sun Yat-sen dies, wanted the Soviet money and the CCP's skill at organizing labor unions.
And the communists wanted access to the nationalists' army and their political legitimacy. They planned to infiltrate the GMD from within and eventually take it over.
So both sides were just waiting for the moment to betray the other. The only question was who would move first.
And the answer was Chiang Kai-shek. By 1927, their joint military campaign, the Northern Expedition, had been a huge success. They defeated most of the major warlords. Chiang no longer needed the communists.
And he feared their growing influence, especially in the big cities like Shanghai.
So in April 1927, he struck the Shanghai Massacre.
The White Terror.
He used the Green Gang, which was a powerful local mafia, along with his own troops, and they just systematically hunted down and executed communists, labor leaders, anyone suspected of being a leftist. Thousands were killed.
And this is the moment that completely changes the trajectory of the CCP. It's a near-death experience.
It absolutely is. They are wiped out in the cities. Their entire strategy, which was based on the Russian model of an urban proletariat-led revolution, is now impossible.
Because the proletariat in the cities had just been massacred.
So the few who survive have to flee. And they don't flee to another city. They flee to the one place the nationalists can't easily reach them: the remote mountainous countryside. Specifically, the Jinggang Mountains in Jiangxi province.
And this is where Mao's big idea starts to take shape. This is the real birth of Maoism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the Soviet advisors, the Comintern agents, are still telling them, you need to focus on the cities. You need to rebuild your urban base.
But Mao looks around at these mountains and says, what urban base? There are no factories here. There's no proletariat. There are just peasants.
And so he makes this massive ideological leap. He argues that in China, the revolutionary energy won't come from a handful of factory workers. It will come from the hundreds of millions of impoverished, oppressed peasants.
This was heresy to orthodox Marxists, wasn't it?
Oh, complete heresy. Marx wrote about the idiocy of rural life. To the Soviets, this was just populist peasant rebellion, not true scientific socialism. But Mao was, above all, a pragmatist.
He used what he had.
He used what he had. And he starts to build a model for his revolution in this mountain base, the Jiangxi Soviet. He starts experimenting with land reform, taking land from the big landlords and redistributing it to the poor peasants.
And for a peasant who has never owned land in his life, this must have seemed like a miracle.
It was everything. It was a direct, tangible benefit. It gave them a reason to fight for the Red Army.
But even as he's building this peasant support, we see the first glimpse of his ruthless side, his methods for dealing with internal dissent. The Fusion incident in 1930.
Yes. This moment is so important, and it often gets overlooked in the bigger narrative of the Long March or the Japanese War. But it sets a crucial precedent.
What happened?
Mao came to suspect that a local Red Army unit was disloyal, that they were part of a rival faction within the party. There was some infighting going on.
Okay.
His response was not to reassign them or re-educate them. He ordered a purge. His security forces rounded up the unit, tortured them into confessions, and executed around 4,000 of them.
4,000 of his own soldiers.
4,000 of his own men. It sent a terrifying message throughout the party. Loyalty to the leadership, which increasingly meant loyalty to Mao himself, was absolute. Dissent, or even the suspicion of dissent, would be met with extreme violence. The party controls the gun.
So while he's consolidating power internally in Jiangxi, the nationalists haven't forgotten about him. Chiang Kai-shek is still obsessed with wiping out this communist bandit problem.
He launches a series of what he calls extermination campaigns. He sends huge nationalist armies into the mountains to crush the Jiangxi Soviet.
And the first 4 fail pretty badly.
They do. The Red Army, using Mao's guerrilla tactics, just lures the bigger, slower nationalist forces deep into the mountains and then ambushes them. It's a classic asymmetric warfare strategy.
For the 5th campaign, Chiang changes tactics.
He does. He hires German military advisors, most famously Hans von Seeckt, and they tell him to stop chasing the communists. They advise him to build a ring of concrete blockhouses or forts around the communist base.
So it's a siege.
A slow, methodical siege. They built thousands of these forts, connected by roads, and just slowly tightened the noose, cutting off supplies, starving them out. And by 1934, it was working. The communists were trapped.
They had to either surrender and be executed or try to break out and run.
And that is the beginning of the Long March, October 1934. It's framed in CCP mythology as this heroic strategic advance. But we have to be clear. It was a desperate, panicked retreat.
A year-long fighting retreat.
An 11,000-kilometer, or roughly 7,000-mile, trek across the hardest terrain in China. Across mountains, rivers, and swamps, all while being bombed by the Nationalist Air Force and chased by their armies.
It's an incredible feat of endurance. But there's a specific moment during the march that the sources all point to as the real turning point for Mao's career, the Zunyi Conference.
Yes, January 1935, a few months into the march, and things are going terribly. They are losing thousands of men. Morale is at rock bottom.
And why was it going so badly?
Because Mao had actually been sidelined just before the march began. The people in charge of military strategy were the pro-Soviet faction of the party, and their main military advisor was a German Comintern agent named Otto Braun.
And Otto Braun didn't believe in guerrilla warfare.
No, he was a conventional European military mind. He believed in positional warfare. He had the Red Army marching in a straight line, carrying heavy equipment, trying to fight the nationalists head-on.
Which is suicide when you're outnumbered 10-1.
Absolute suicide. And they were getting slaughtered. So when the battered remnants of the army reached the city of Zunyi, Mao sees his chance. He calls a meeting of the party leadership, the Politburo.
And he basically puts the blame for the disaster squarely on the foreign advisor and his Chinese supporters.
He does. He stands up and delivers this blistering critique. He argues that this foreign strategy is destroying the revolution. He says they need to return to his strategy of mobile guerrilla warfare. The enemy advances, we retreat. The enemy camps, we harass. The enemy tires, we attack. The enemy retreats, we pursue.
So he's not just making a tactical argument, he's making a nationalist one. He's saying, stop listening to the Russians and Germans. They don't understand China. I understand China.
That's the core of it. And because the situation was so desperate and the failure of Braun's strategy was so obvious, the other leaders, including key figures like Zhu Enlai and Zhu Dai, swing their support to Mao.
He emerges from the Zunyi Conference with effective military command of the Red Army.
He does. It's a political coup in the middle of a military retreat. This is the moment the CCP truly becomes Mao's party. And it's why the Long March, despite being a military defeat, becomes the foundational myth of the People's Republic.
It's the story of survival, of martyrdom, of the triumph of the correct native Chinese path over the incorrect foreign one.
It's their Valley Forge. Out of about 100,000 people who started the march, maybe only 10 or 20,000 survived to reach the final destination in 1935.
A safe haven in Yan'an, in the remote north.
And this begins the Yan'an period, from 1935 to 1945. They set up their new headquarters in a series of cave dwellings dug into the soft Loess cliffs. And this decade in Yan'an is the laboratory where they really build the prototype for the future Chinese state.
And our sources really paint a picture of two Yan'ans existing at the same time. There's the public face, and then there's the internal reality.
Let's talk about the public face first, because it was an incredibly effective piece of propaganda. To the outside world, and especially to the local peasants, the communists in Yan'an looked like saints.
They practiced what they preached.
They did. They implemented strict rules of conduct for the Red Army. The 3 rules of discipline and 8 points for attention. Simple things, but revolutionary at the time.
Like what?
Things like, speak politely, pay fairly for what you buy, return everything you borrow, don't damage crops, don't take liberties with women.
Which, if you're a peasant who has only ever known warlord armies and corrupt nationalist troops who rape and pillage as a matter of course.
This is just mind-blowing. It won them the hearts and minds of the peasantry in a way the nationalists never could. They also implemented land redistribution and literacy programs. They were seen as honest, disciplined, and dedicated to helping the poor.
They also developed this concept of the mass line.
Yes, the idea that the party must live among the people, listen to their concerns, learn from them, and then translate their scattered ideas into a focused revolutionary program, from the masses to the masses.
So that's the good Yan'an, the idealized version. What was the dark side?
The dark side was happening inside the party itself. While projecting this image of unity and service, Mao was ruthlessly enforcing ideological conformity. This culminates in the rectification campaigns, starting around 1942.
This is where they start using self-criticism sessions.
It's a form of psychological conditioning, really. Party members, especially intellectuals who had fled from the cities to join the revolution, were forced to undergo these intense struggle sessions.
How did they work?
You would have to write a detailed, exhaustive confession of your entire life. Every mistake, every selfish thought, every doubt you ever had about the party line. Then you would have to stand up in front of a group of your comrades and read it aloud.
And the group wouldn't just listen quietly.
No, they would scream at you. They would accuse you of being insincere, of hiding your true bourgeois thoughts. It would go on for hours, sometimes days, until you broke down completely, weeping and denouncing your former self.
It's a way of destroying an individual's independent judgment.
Completely. You learn to stop trusting your own thoughts and to rely solely on the party for what is true and correct. It forged the party into a monolith. By the end of this process, there was only one legitimate way of thinking. Mao Zedong thought.
So by 1945, the CCP is this incredibly disciplined, ideologically unified, battle-hardened force with a strong base of peasant support. But they're still much, much smaller and weaker than the nationalists.
They are. They're still the underdogs. What completely changes the balance of power is an external event. The full-scale Japanese invasion of China in 1937.
We really can't overstate the importance of this. World War II in Asia basically saves the CCP from destruction.
Mao himself admitted as much later in life. He told a visiting Japanese delegation that the CCP should thank Japan, because without their invasion, the communists never would have come to power.
And why is that? How did the war help them?
Because the nationalists were the official government of China. So when the Japanese Imperial Army invaded, it was Chiang Kai-shek's army that had to meet them in the field.
They had to fight the big conventional battles.
Exactly. And they got decimated. Chiang threw his best German-trained divisions into the defense of Shanghai, and they were just annihilated by Japanese firepower. The nationalists bore the brunt of the casualties, the expense, and the humiliation of the war, like the horrific rape of Nanjing.
So while Chiang's army is bleeding out against the Japanese,
Mao is in the hills of Yan'an, largely avoiding direct confrontation. He orders his forces to use guerrilla tactics. They expand their territory behind Japanese lines, organizing peasants, taking over villages that the Japanese controlled by day, but the communists controlled by night.
So the war allowed them to preserve their own strength, while their main rival was being destroyed by a third party.
Yes. By the time Japan surrenders in 1945, the dynamic is completely shifted. The nationalists are exhausted, their best troops are gone, their government is seen as corrupt and incompetent, and their economy is in ruins.
And the communists?
The communists are stronger than they have ever been. Their army has grown from maybe 30,000 to nearly 1 million men. They control vast swaths of the countryside. They are disciplined, morale is high, and they're ready for the final showdown.
Which brings us to the Chinese Civil War, 1945 to 1949.
The final round. And on paper, at the start, it looked like the nationalists should have won easily.
They had more troops, a bigger army.
A much bigger army.
Yeah.
They had an air force. And they had the official backing of the United States, which was ferrying their troops around the country and supplying them with planes, tanks, and weapons. So why did they collapse so spectacularly in just 4 years?
It was a total implosion from within. The first and maybe most important factor was economic, hyperinflation. The nationalist government just printed money to pay its bills. I've seen pictures of people pushing wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread.
It completely wiped out the savings of the urban middle class, the GMD's natural base of support. When your life savings become worthless overnight, you lose all faith in the government.
And then there was a corruption.
It was legendary. Nationalist officers would sell their American-supplied weapons on the black market, often directly to the communists. They would create ghost soldiers on the payroll listing troops that didn't exist and then pocketing their salaries. Troop morale was abysmal.
Meanwhile, on the communist side, you have brilliant military commanders like Lin Biao, who takes the guerrilla force of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, and transforms it into a modern conventional fighting force.
He executes these incredible campaigns in Manchuria, encircling and starving out entire nationalist armies. And you have peasant support.
Yeah.
The peasants would act as spies, porters, and new recruits for the PLA.
And we can't forget about intelligence, the spying.
It was a catastrophe for the nationalists. We know now from the archives that Chiang Kai-shek's inner circle was completely compromised. His own assistant chief of staff was a communist agent.
So Mao knew Chiang's battle plans.
Often before Chiang's own generals did. The entire nationalist war effort was transparent to the enemy. It was a total systemic failure.
So by late 1949, it's all over. The PLA sweeps south. Chiang Kai-shek and the remnants of his government flee to the island of Taiwan.
And Mao stands on that balcony in Beijing, which ends part one, the emergence. But as we said at the top, winning the war was, in some ways, the easy part.
Right. Now they have to govern. Which brings us to part two, consolidation and maintenance. 1949 to Mao's death in 1976.
And the first few years, from 49 to about 53, are all about locking down the state. They move with incredible speed and ruthlessness to establish control.
Their first move isn't political, it's military.
It is. The country is divided into 6 large regions, each one run by a military command. It's effectively martial law. And they immediately launch what they call the reunification campaigns in 1950.
This isn't really about reunification, is it? It's about conquest.
It's about securing the old imperial borders of China. The PLA invades and occupies Tibet. It secures the massive western region of Xinjiang, and it mops up the last bits of nationalist resistance in the south.
So they secure the borders, but then they have to control the population inside those borders. This is where the anti-movements come in.
Yes, these were a series of national campaigns designed to terrorize and neutralize any potential sources of opposition. The first was the Three Antis campaign in 1951.
And that was aimed at corruption, waste, and bureaucracy within the party itself.
Right, it was an internal house cleaning. But the Five Antis campaign in 1952 was aimed outward at the business and commercial class, the bourgeoisie.
The charges were things like bribery, tax evasion, theft of state property, fraud.
But the real purpose wasn't justice. It was a political shakedown. The party would encourage employees to denounce their bosses. They set up denunciation boxes in cities where people could submit anonymous accusations.
And business owners would be dragged before these public struggle sessions.
Yes, they'd be screamed at, humiliated, beaten, and forced to confess to whatever crimes they were accused of. The fines were so enormous that they effectively had to hand over their entire businesses to the state. It was a way of crushing the private sector and seizing its assets.
And speaking of struggle sessions, we have to talk about how they handled the countryside. Land reform. This wasn't just, a quiet legal process of changing property deeds.
Oh, no. It was a process of calculated, ritualized violence. Party cadres would go into a village, and their first job was to classify everyone, to divide them into categories. Landlords, rich peasant, middle peasant, poor peasant.
They're creating class conflict where it might not have even existed.
They are manufacturing it. Then they would organize speak bitterness sessions, encouraging the poor peasants to get up and publicly air their grievances against the local landlords to talk about decades of exploitation.
And this would often whip the crowd into a frenzy.
That was the goal. The sessions would frequently end with the peasants themselves beating the landlord to death with farm tools. The estimates are that between 1 and 2 million landlords were killed during this period.
And from Mao's perspective, there's a brutal logic to having the peasants do the killing themselves.
It's a point of no return. Once you have participated in the public execution of your local landlord, you are bloodbound to the revolution. You can never go back. If the nationalists had ever returned, they would execute you. Your only hope for survival is the continued victory of the Communist Party.
It's an incredibly powerful and terrifying tool of social control. And to make sure that control was absolute, they introduced the registration system.
The hukou.
Hukou, or household registration system. Our sources call it a kind of internal passport, but even that doesn't really capture its power.
It's more than that.
It's a biological tether. Your hukou registered you, your family, your class status to a specific village or city neighborhood. and you could not legally move without permission.
But the real enforcement mechanism wasn't a policeman on the road, it was food.
Exactly. The state had nationalized the grain trade. All grain was sold to the state at a fixed price. To buy food, you needed ration coupons. And your ration coupons were only valid in the location where your hukou was registered. So if I'm a peasant in a village and I'm unhappy, I can physically walk to the nearest city. But once I get there,
I can't buy rice, I can't buy flour, I can't get a job or housing because those were also controlled by the state and tied to your registration.
yeah,
You would starve. It locked people in place.
it's a level of control that's hard to comprehend.
Total social atomization.
Uh-huh.
Everyone is dependent on the state and its local representatives for their very survival. And then, just as they're implementing all this, an external event happens that helps them consolidate power even further.
The Korean War, 1950.
Yes. When America gets involved, China enters the war on North Korea's side. And Mao uses this conflict brilliantly for domestic purposes.
Yeah.
He launches the Resist America, Aid Korea campaign.
It creates a common enemy. It's a powerful nationalist rallying cry.
And it provides the perfect excuse to crack down even harder on internal dissent. Anyone who questioned the party could now be labeled not just a counter-revolutionary, but a spy for American imperialism. The Great Terror intensified under the cover of war.
Okay, so they've locked down the country, they've neutralized their class enemies, they've tied everyone to the land. Now Mao turns to the economy. He has this vision of transforming China from a backward agrarian nation into an industrial superpower overnight.
And the first attempt, the first five-year plan from 1952 to 57, was actually pretty successful.
It was.
It was a direct copy of the Soviet model. All investment was poured into heavy industry, steel, coal, electric power. They had thousands of Soviet advisors and engineers helping them, and the numbers were impressive. Industrial output more than doubled. The urban population grew dramatically.
So a success. But for Mao, successful wasn't enough.
It was too slow. It was too conventional. It was too Soviet. Mao was a romantic revolutionary. He believed in the power of human will, of mass mobilization to overcome any material obstacle. He thought China could leap over the normal stages of development.
And this leads directly to the Great Leap Forward in 1958.
Probably the greatest man-made catastrophe of the 20th century. Mao's hubris was at its peak. He announced that China would overtake Great Britain in steel production in just a few years.
And his method for doing this was to collectivize everything.
Everything. Private farming was completely abolished. The peasants' land, their tools, even their cooking pots were taken away. The entire countryside was reorganized into about 26,000 massive people's communes. People ate in communal kitchens. Life was totally militarized.
And at the center of this were two crazy campaigns, General Grain and General Steel.
For steel, Mao had this idea that instead of building large, efficient steel mills, you could achieve the national production target by having everyone make steel in their own backyard.
The backyard furnaces.
Backyard furnaces. He ordered tens of millions of peasants to stop farming, build these small, crude mud brick furnaces, and start making steel.
But they didn't know how to make steel.
Of course not. And even if they did, a backyard furnace can't get hot enough to produce usable steel. The temperature isn't high enough to burn off the impurities.
So what were they making?
Useless, brittle pig iron. It would shatter if you hit it with a hammer. It was good for nothing. But the real tragedy was the fuel. To feed these furnaces, people melted down their own pots and pans, their farm implements, their door knockers.
So they destroyed their useful metal tools to create useless metal lumps.
Precisely. They were actively destroying the country's agricultural capital. And while they were doing this, nobody was tending the fields.
And at the same time, for agriculture, they were applying these crackpot Soviet agricultural theories.
Yes, from Trofim Lysenko. He had these pseudoscientific ideas like that you could plant seeds incredibly close together and they would cooperate rather than compete, or that you could plow the land several feet deep to unlock its hidden fertility.
None of which works.
It was a total disaster. The crops failed. So you have a massive drop in the actual amount of food being grown.
Yeah.
But, and this is the crucial part, the reports going to Beijing claimed the opposite.
The local officials were lying about the harvests. Why?
Because the political atmosphere was so intense, no official wanted to be the one to report failure. That would make you a rightist, a naysayer who lacked revolutionary enthusiasm. You'd be purged. So to protect themselves, they just made up numbers. They reported enormous, record-breaking harvests that were pure fantasy.
And the central government in Beijing believed these numbers.
They did, and they set the state grain procurement tax based on these fake numbers. So let's say a commune actually produces 10 tons of grain, but to look good, they report a harvest of 50 tons.
Okay.
The state then comes and says, our tax is 20%, so you owe us 10 tons of grain.
Which is all the grain they actually grew.
Exactly. The state took everything, leaving the peasants with nothing to eat. And because of the hukou system and the ban on private trade, they couldn't flee. They couldn't go to another village to beg for food. They were trapped in their communes, and they starved.
The Great Famine, 1958 to 1962. The death toll is just. It's incomprehensible.
The lowest credible estimates are around 30 million excess deaths. Some scholars, using demographic analysis, put it as high as 45 million or even more. There are widespread documented reports of cannibalism. It is a horror on an unimaginable scale.
And in the middle of this, did anyone in the leadership try to stop it? Did anyone tell Mao the truth?
One person did, Peng Dehuai. He was the defense minister, a veteran of the Long March, a genuine war hero. In 1959, at a party conference in Lushan, he wrote Mao a private, respectful letter, gently pointing out that some of the reports from the countryside might be exaggerated and that there were problems.
So, constructive criticism from an old comrade.
And Mao's reaction was volcanic. He saw it as a personal attack, a challenge to his authority. He publicly denounced Peng, stripped him of all his posts, and labeled him the leader of an anti-party clique. Peng would later die under persecution during the Cultural Revolution.
What message did that send to the rest of the leadership?
The clearest possible message. Truth does not matter. Loyalty to Mao matters. It is better to stand by and watch millions of peasants starve to death than it is to criticize the chairman and risk your own career and your life.
Eventually, though, the disaster became too big to hide. The economy was in a state of total collapse. Mao had to retreat.
He did. He was forced to step back from day-to-day management of the economy. He remained chairman of the party, but the practical work of cleaning up the mess fell to more moderate leaders, like Liu Xiaopu and Deng Xiaoping.
And they basically reversed the Great Leap.
They did. They quietly disbanded most of the communes, allowed peasants to have small private plots again, and brought back market incentives. And guess what? The famine ended. The economy started to recover.
But Mao is watching all of this from the sidelines, and he's not happy. He doesn't see recovery. He sees counter-revolution.
He sees revisionism. He's paranoid that China is going down the same path as the Soviet Union under Khrushchev, which he viewed as having betrayed socialism and gone capitalist. He sees these pragmatic policies as a threat to the revolutionary spirit. He feels he's being turned into a figurehead.
So he decides to retake absolute power by unleashing a new revolution, this time against the party itself.
In 1966, he launches the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. And since the party bureaucracy was now controlled by his rivals, he couldn't use the party to attack the party. He had to go outside the system.
He turned to the youth, the students.
He weaponized them. He told an entire generation of teenagers that their teachers, their school principals, even their own parents and local party officials were capitalist roaders and bourgeois reactionaries who had to be overthrown.
And he gave them a Bible, the Little Red Book.
A Little Red Book. Quotations from Chairman Mao, compiled by his new sycophantic defense minister, Lin Biao. It became a sacred text. And Mao gave the students his blessing with a single slogan: "It is right to rebel."
And they did. The country descended into chaos.
Horrific chaos. These students formed gangs of Red Guards. They closed the schools. They dragged their teachers out into the streets, put dunce caps on them, and beat them, sometimes to death. They ransacked people's homes, destroying anything considered part of the Four Olds. Old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits.
Temples were burned, ancient texts destroyed, priceless art smashed. It was a war on China's own history.
But for Mao, this chaos was a political tool. He used the Red Guards as his personal army to purge his rivals. Liu Xiaoqi, the president of China, was publicly denounced, imprisoned, and left to die of untreated pneumonia, lying in his own filth.
Deng Xiaoping was sent to work as a fitter in a tractor factory. His son was tormented by Red Guards until he jumped from a window, becoming paralyzed from the waist down.
It was a brutal, complete purge of the moderate wing of the party. But the problem with chaos is that it's hard to control. By 1968, the Red Guard factions were fighting each other with machine guns and artillery they'd stolen from army barracks. China was on the verge of a full-blown civil war.
So Mao has to call in the one institution that hadn't completely disintegrated.
The army. The PLA. He orders them to go in and restore order. And this begins a new, even more violent phase of the Cultural Revolution called cleansing the class ranks, where the army carries out systematic purges across the country.
It's just wave after wave of violence. And in the middle of all this, there's the bizarre episode with Lin Biao, his chosen successor.
His closest comrade in arms, the man who had compiled the Little Red Book and built the cult of Mao. By 1971, Mao had grown wary of Lin's power. He seemed too powerful, too popular with the army.
So Mao starts to move against him.
And Lin Biao, according to the official story, panics. He allegedly plots a coup against Mao. When it fails, he, his wife, and his son try to flee to the Soviet Union in a military jet.
But the plane crashes in Mongolia.
The plane crashes. Everyone on board is killed. And the Chinese people, who for 5 years had been told every single day that Lin Biao was Mao's most brilliant and loyal disciple, are now told he was a traitor and a secret agent for the Soviets.
That must have been a profound moment of disillusionment.
It was a huge psychological blow. It broke the spell for many people. If the designated successor was a traitor, then who could be trusted? What did any of it mean? It was just a naked, brutal power struggle. A deep cynicism began to set in.
And while all this internal chaos is happening, Mao makes one of the most stunning foreign policy pivots of the 20th century.
The opening to the United States. It was driven by fear of the Soviet Union. The Sino-Soviet split had become so hostile that the two countries were actually fighting border clashes in 1969. Mao genuinely feared a Soviet invasion.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Classic realpolitik. So after some secret diplomacy in 1972, Richard Nixon, the world's leading anti-communist, lands in Beijing and shakes hands with Mao Zedong. It was a diplomatic earthquake that reshaped the Cold War.
As we get into the mid-1970s, Mao's health is failing. He's a shadow of his former self. But the power struggles around his deathbed are intensifying.
You have two main factions. On one side, the radical ultra-leftists, led by Mao's wife Jiang Qing and 3 of her associates from Shanghai. They become known as the Gang of Four.
And they want to continue the Cultural Revolution.
They do. And on the other side are the rehabilitated moderates, like Zhu Enlai and the recently returned Deng Xiaoping, who want to end the chaos and focus on rebuilding the economy.
In early 1976, Zhu Enlai dies, and his death becomes a flashpoint.
The people of Beijing spontaneously pour into Tiananmen Square to mourn him, but the mourning quickly turns into a protest against the Gang of Four and the endless turmoil. It's the first major, popular, anti-government demonstration of the PRC's history.
It's suppressed, of course.
It is, but it's a sign that the people are exhausted. They're done with permanent revolution. A few months later, on September 9th, 1976, Mao Zedong dies.
And with him, the era of chaos ends.
Almost immediately. Less than a month after his death, the other leaders in the Politburo stage a coup. They arrest the Gang of Four without a single shot being fired. The Cultural Revolution is officially declared over.
So we've covered this massive arc, from the 57 members in Shanghai to the victory in 49, and then from the consolidation of the state through the Great Famine and the Cultural Revolution. When you step back and look at the whole picture, how do you even begin to assess the legacy?
It's the ultimate historical paradox. It's that liberator versus oppressor debate, and the evidence for both is overwhelming.
Let's take the liberator case first.
He took a country that had been humiliated for a century, that was fractured and weak, and he unified it. He kicked out the foreign powers. He ended the era of the warlords. He built a powerful centralized state. He industrialized the country and made it a nuclear power. And, to be fair, basic life expectancy and literacy rose dramatically under his rule, thanks to programs like the Barefoot Doctors and simplified Chinese characters.
He made China stand up, as he said. But then there's the cost, the
Yeah.
oppressor side of the ledger.
And the cost is almost beyond human calculation. You have the millions killed in the land reform and the anti-campaigns. You have the 45 million or more who died in the Great Famine. The millions more persecuted and killed during the Cultural Revolution. The destruction of thousands of years of Chinese art, culture, and tradition. The psychological trauma inflicted on a generation taught to denounce their own parents. The death toll from his policies is staggering, likely somewhere between 45 and 70 million people.
So I want to leave our listeners with this one provocative thought that comes out of the source material. Mao's entire method of rule was based on chaos. He maintained power by constantly destabilizing the very system he created. He pitted the people against the party and the party against itself.
Yes, permanent revolution.
But at the same time, he built a Leninist party structure, the machinery of the state, the PLA, the security apparatus, that was so resilient, so powerful, that it managed to survive even the catastrophic disasters that he himself created. It survived the Great Leap Forward. It survived the Cultural Revolution.
That is the ultimate paradox of his rule. The party structure he built was stronger than his own attempts to destroy it.
Which leaves us with the fundamental question that hangs over modern China to this day. Is the stability and power of China today a result of the foundation Mao built? Or is China's success today only possible because it managed to survive him and move past his ideology?
And that is the question that historians will be debating for centuries to come.
Thanks for this deep dive.
Thank you.